Welcome to another edition of Behind the Pen. This is when JT Ellison, that's the other person in the screen here, and I get to interview someone who is associated with that fabulous bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, Behind the Pen. And today we are excited to talk to Patrick Millikin, bookseller from Behind the Pen. And Patrick, welcome to our little series here, which seems to be progressing right along. We're working our way through the staff of the pen. It's very exciting.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah.
Well, we're excited to talk to you, and we might as well start just from the get-go and tell us your journey to the pen. How did you wind up working at that store?
Wow. Let's see. I was at ASU, and I was an English major, and at the time I'd been working at a couple of other bookstores before this. It's hard to believe, but I was working at a local independent bookstore in Scottsdale, and Barbara would come in the evening sometimes. It was in a kind of a she little mall that had nice restaurants and stuff. And she would come in every once in a while and get a coffee and bring an author in sometimes for dinner at one of the restaurants. And I was aware of the pen, and I'd been in a few times. At that time, I wasn't, I was kind of a literary snob, because I was deep into my English major. But she came in.
We forgive you. It's all right. It's okay.
Yeah, no. So anyway, she would come in, and I struck up a conversation with her, and anyway, she got me, persuaded me to come over and do some moonlighting at the bookstore. They needed some help after hours, doing some packing and helping out. And I said, sure, yeah. And that was in early 1995. And at that time, the Poison Pen, I think, yeah, now that I think about it, I think the reason she wanted some extra help is that the pen was hosting the annual Left Coast Crime Conference that year. And, in 1995, what a lineup. I mean, it was, so I got to meet Tony Hillerman. I got to meet Robert B. Parker, and all these legends at the time, of course, that were still alive. And that was kind of how I started in 95. And, during the course of that year, this other little indie bookstore was facing hard times. At that time, you guys, I'm sure, both know this very well. There was that whole phenomenon of the big box store that was just sort of arriving on the scene in the early to mid 90s. And so in Phoenix here, we had tons of, well, not tons, but we had a nice selection of independent bookstores then. And then, Barnes and Noble started to make inroads, and Bookstar came in here, and then Borders. And all of a sudden, all the indies shuttered really quickly. And so I was facing an uncertain future at this other indie bookstore, and it was just the right place at the right time. Barbara needed somebody, and 27 plus years later, excuse me, here I am. It was never my plan to make. God, I'm sorry about my throat.
Well, we understand the never a plan, because we didn't have a plan to make a career in writing either. That just it sort of happens.
Yeah, no, it's but I was it was like a calling in some ways. There was something about just being in the environment around books all the time. It was just, on the good days, it still is very, stimulating and satisfying. It's it beats being in a cubicle somewhere. And
Sure.
a lot of my friends and peers, as we grow up, they went on, some of them, to get corporate jobs and make nice handsome livings. And but I don't, the longer I'm here and the older I get, the more thankful I am, that I've managed to have this gig all this time. It's been an amazing period of time.
You called it, we've talked about this a little bit before, you called it genteel poverty.
Yeah, well, you know, I can't complain. You know, for bookstore, for the kind of work this is, you know, Barbara takes care of us very well. You know, I got to hand it to her. So
What
I
do you-
can,
what do you
compared to
think-
some of my friends who make, you know, big bucks, but my wife and I, you know, we do okay.
I wanted to ask, follow on real quick then, is this is the store that survived against
Yes.
all those big box stores which have come and gone mostly.
Right.
What do you think the magic was, besides having you on the staff, of course? That was obviously a plus.
Boy, it's a really good question. I think the magic in big part was just Barbara, you know, and her chutzpah, you know, and she's, you know, as you both know, she's a force of nature. And she built this bookstore, you know, with a really just a lot of sweat equity. And, you know, she had a vision. And at the beginning, you know, it was very focused. And it was very much more focused on mystery and detective fiction. That's still kind of our area, one of our areas of expertise, but we've expanded. So I think early on during the whole box store thing, it was definitely to our advantage to be specialized, you know, whereas at that time it was much harder to be a general purpose independent, you know, it just was. And having something that, you know, she focused on and had such expertise and such, you know, connections within the industry, and, you know, doing, you know, she did a monthly newsletter from the very beginning. And I think it was just a lot of hard work, and a lot of the whole book collecting phenomenon really helped early on. You remember in the early 90s, John Dunning had that book come out, Book to Die, and it created this big, you know, big phenomenon in the book world of collecting autographed first editions. And so that's been a big part of our business over the years. You know, lots of author events, lots of signings, lots of, you know, things like that.
Well, that's a good segue. Is the in-person versus the online? I mean, you guys have, we were talking about it before we started. You guys have revolutionized the online during the pandemic. I mean, you've managed to bring in a mass of readers and writers and new people to the store, and have grown the footprint. I mean, where do you see this going? Are we going to be going back on the road on a regular basis, or is that going to be a really special thing, and the Zoom is going to be how we do events going forward?
I have a feeling it's going to be, I mean, it's hard to see now what the new normal is going to be, but I see now that door is open, I don't see it closing, the virtual thing, because everybody, and don't you both wish that you'd invested in Zoom, you know, in early like 2020? But we've always done some virtual part of it. You know, we usually, in the past, we've live streamed our events, but on a much more primitive way, you know. But we were doing that for a long time. I think that when the pandemic hit, everybody was scrambling, you know, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep this going? And you know, luckily we'd been doing, as I say, some version of streaming before that, and so we knew we had to pick up the pace and do that. And I think we just fell into it. You know, Barbara, as you know, as always, is sort of looking one step ahead, and very wisely got us up to speed. And we've done hundreds of them over the last couple of years, and it's been, you know, as I was kind of complaining to Jayne and JT before we got started, just at the relentlessness of it. Whereas before, you know, you'd have maybe one event a day. What a concept, you know, a live event. And now, you know, you can stack them up and do 2 or 3 a day. And so for me anyway, it's been great and a little challenging, you know. As somewhat of an introvert, it kind of have to psych myself up sometimes to do it, but it's also been wonderful, because the conversations that we have often take on a slightly different feel, than they would if you were in front of an audience, and sometimes we can get into some really interesting territory, that isn't just about, hitting those main beats about an author promoting their new book. And there are like 4 or 5 questions you can ask. And, we hit those, but then we also go off on really interesting tangents on some of the virtual events. So I think it's been great. And it's also expanded awareness of our store. I mean, all over the place. I mean, there are a lot of people that weren't aware of the Poison Pen. And so whereas we might have, even 50 or 100 people in the store for a busy event, we have this vast archive of virtual events that people, if they're truly bored, can go through and watch them. And it's pretty cool. I mean, we've put together a real archive of the last few years with all these events.
How do you organize it? I mean, that's actually a good question. Do you have a plan for how it's going to be? Look up interviews with Cozy Mysteries here, look up interviews with Noir Mysteries there, or have you done anything along those lines?
It's a good idea. That is a really good, I mean, we have a very loose organization online of them, but I think that's a great idea, Jayne. We could put some tags in there that, have them part of a library, that if you wanted to search our noir or our romance, or I'll look into that.
Okay.
It's also, it's kind of a master class. I mean, with as many people as you've had come through that are talking about their work, that are talking about their writing, for a new author, this is a treasure trove of, I mean, you can learn the craft. You can sit down for a week and watch all of these episodes and really learn the craft from a bunch of very, very smart authors.
Brilliant idea. That you're absolutely right, JT. It's like a giant master class.
Yeah.
There's a marketing idea for you. More work, Patrick.
Well,
more work.
That's the thing. I would like to do more of that kind of thing, more, because we have so many authors, in the past, most of them were coming through the store. And I'd love to capitalize on that, with you guys too, doing maybe when you do your event for your latest book, we could also schedule an hour or two to do a separate writer's workshop. We've done that before. So be careful what you wish for, JT.
Oh, you know what a great teacher I am. Not a good teacher.
No, but it's great. It's a good resource for people. Sorry to interrupt, but it's
No.
Also during the pandemic, I think it's had almost a more important function, which is keeping people connected, right? Keeping people in our community, the overall book community, perhaps, they didn't feel quite so isolated and alone. They could come in and listen to the programs and, get a little bit of stimulation or just that feeling of connectedness. I think that was a big part of the pandemic, is everybody just felt so isolated, and, it's so easy to get depressed. And so I think by having these virtual events has had that benefit as well. At least that's what a lot of people have said. So I'm happy to hear that.
That was always sort of a function of a bookstore anyway.
Yes.
So.
Yep. I was going to say the exact same thing. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, people need a place that isn't a bar, or, they need a place to congregate, I don't know about you guys, but it's like on my off days, I find myself prowling around used bookstores, even still. There's just something therapeutic about being around books. And that's why I love JT's wall of books behind. Whenever I go into somebody's house, my first thought is, all right, so where are their books?
Where are the books?
Where are the books?
I don't trust people that don't have books.
Yeah.
It's like, really? You don't? None? Really? Wow. Okay. I mean, I'm not judging you. It's just, it is such an intimate experience to know what somebody likes to read.
Yeah.
And that's, as a bookseller, you've been that person for so many people, that you have given them the book that has changed their life. You've given them a book that has elevated them from a hard time that they've gone through. You know, you've made a recommendation, you've made careers for authors by getting them fans. I mean, being a bookseller is a pretty potent kind of thing, don't you think?
I agree.
It's important.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not curing cancer or anything, but it is fun. And you're right. I mean, there is something very personal about it, you know, and that's one of the things I love is it's just the old fashioned art of hand selling.
Yeah.
I still love that. That's one of my favorite parts of the job. You know, you get people that come in and, you know, they start to trust you or what you recommend, and you make that connection with them. Yeah.
When you first started out in the store and you said you were coming from a literary background,
Yes.
how did you get, and I already know the answer, that you found your way into noir, that became kind of a specialty for you, because it says that on Barbara's newsletter that you specialize in it. So how did you find that? I mean, what, after starting at a store that was kind of a different world in terms of what you were used to reading,
Right.
how'd you get into noir?
It was, you know, it was really kind of a revelation to me. You know, I had this preconceived idea of what a mystery novel was. You know, I thought it was like, I was thinking mainly of the cozy model, you know, the body in the library, the Cabot Cove, that kind of thing, the puzzle plot mystery. And I've grown to appreciate those more and more. At first, however, I was like, that doesn't really interest me too much. And I think I naturally responded to the more hard-boiled American school. You know, it was just early on, it was just me just devouring all this stuff that I was not aware of, that they don't teach you in most English departments. I think that's starting to change, but, you know, reading all of Hammett and Chandler for the first time, you know, discovering that, discovering Chester Himes, discovering James Cain, you know, just all these early, you know, Dorothy B. Hughes. It was just like, wow, what a revelation, you know, and also discovering the modern, you know, the modern crime writers, and saying, you know, I really reevaluated, you know, my view. You know, I said, wow, some of the most interesting and quote literary work is being done in the genres, you know, and absolutely. And so that I just started absorbing and reading and getting turned on to different things, and just getting really excited about it, you know. And with the noir stuff specifically, I think I was attracted to the whole existential element of it. You know, you can see why the French loved the hard-boiled crime novel and the noir novel, and that they kind of rose at the same time, the existentialist movement and the hard-boiled noir, you know, in the late 40s and 50s. And they dovetailed very nicely. And I don't know, it just appealed to me. And, you know, also, as I said, I was a tortured soul, late 20s, recovering English major. You know, I mean, that stuff, that's what spoke to me. And so I discovered that, and I still love it, but I love other things as well. You know, I've kind of expanded my interests. But early on, I started a discussion group, a book discussion group here at the store. And we've been going for I think this is our 22nd year. And there are still a couple of members that were original, you know, with me, obviously. I was there from the beginning, but a few original members. And for the first couple of years, what we did was we started at the very beginning of the hard-boiled and noir genre, you know, with those people I just mentioned, you know, the Hammets and the Chandlers. And we went slowly, chronologically forward, and you know, through the 50s, through the Vietnam, the 60s era, into the 80s. And it's been really interesting to kind of to kind of read the crime novel as time capsule over the years, and discovering, all right, well, what was going on in the background, and very interesting. And so now what we do is we kind of go back and forth between, we'll read modern stuff and then we'll go back and read classics. And it's been great,
Do you have a list of those? Do you still have the list? Can we post that list when we do this interview? Can you post the list of all the books that you've done over the past 22 years? Because that's really cool.
I got to give a shout out. One of the members, Jim Kirk is his name. He's our group archivist, and he has a printed list of everything we've done. And it's like cross-referenced, California setting, New York, blah, blah, blah.
I love that.
And sometimes we'll draw a bead on, like, on a particular year, we'll say, all right, well, let's do international set, hard-boiled or crime. And I say it's a hard-boiled and noir, and that's essentially what it is, but we stray a little bit, because sometimes it's so nebulous to try to define what those terms really mean. And so we've strayed a bit, but yeah, it's fun. It's been great.
What kind of changes have you seen in that genre as you've been living through it and observing it? What has it changed much? Is it got trends within it, like other genres have developed trends?
Sure. Yeah. Let me see if I can think of some of them. There's been, I think the healthy thing is that there's been a lot of different styles that have been brought into the mix. I think one of the main things in noir that we've seen is this whole country noir, rural setting. And there are a lot of terrific writers who may have, I'm thinking of people like David Joy, Brian Panowich, the master Daniel Woodrell. They may have, excuse me?
Now S.A. Crosby, he's moving into that.
Yeah, no, Sean, he's great, terrific writer. I don't know, it's always expanding. For a while there was an interesting, connection between science fiction, more speculative fiction, and noir. You saw that. So there's still, it like any genre, you both know, there's always people that are keeping the very traditional, classic PI novel alive. And then there are people that are just writing way out there, experimental crime stuff, there's a nice variety. And I think one of the things that I think is great, and that's finally happening, is that they're allowing more people in. There's a much more of a diversity of stories, and and I think that
all the categories are broadening, all of them.
Yeah,
it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, at last you're seeing more variety of different story, different points of view, different people telling the stories. And I think that can only be healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you got, while we're on that subject, did you have some recommendations?
Yes, I do.
Might as well.
Look at, if you see him, like, ooh, yes, he's twirling his mustache.
Let's see.
The bookseller thing,
Well,
and sell us.
Yeah, actually, I brought kind of a combination of oldies and fairly new ones. This one right here, this book called Rovers by Richard Lang. He has written this book. It's kind of like a hard-boiled vampire novel, if you can imagine that. And he's done it in a really interesting, creative way. So I can't recommend this highly enough. Rovers. That came out last year. What else do I have? I'll just give you a couple. Denise Mina. Sorry, this cover is so reflective. She's one of my favorites, and one I always like to recommend. She's very, widely known, of course, all over the place, perhaps not as well known in America as I think she should be. But if people like, she writes books largely that are set in Scotland and Glasgow, and just a remarkable remarkable writer, I think. And if you like Tana French, people like that, you'll like Denise Mina. She's one of my favorites. What else do I have? We were talking a little bit about international set, hard-boiled noir stuff. And one of my favorites, have you guys ever heard of this writer, Paco Ignacio Taibo II? No doubt. There is a first. He wrote these series of, I think he's still writing, but in the 90s, he wrote these series of detective novels set in Mexico City. And he has this character named Hector Velascoran Shane. And the whole riff of having a private eye or a detective in a culture and society in which, I think, what was the quote, like 75% of crime originates from within the police department, so having a detective in that sort of environment is really interesting.
The ultimate noir.
Very noir, yeah. And he has one of the great titles, which is called No Happy Ending. Of course, they're originally written in Spanish, so an easy thing would be a cosa fácil. And I have very primitive grasp of Spanish. I can read it, but everything's in the present tense when I try to speak it, But I had a chance to meet Paco Taibo in El Paso back in, I think, 2003. And that was a real thrill. So he's one of my heroes. But there are so many. I mean, I think Sarah Gran, she has this book called The Infinite Blacktop. I think she's doing some of the most original and interesting work in the genre right now. Let's see. Are you guys aware of this book by Todd Goldberg, The Low Desert? These are short stories, but they're all crime. They're all interrelated crime stories that take place in a very specific area, which is out in the sort of the Badlands of California near Palm Springs and 29 Palms, Indio, the whole area out there, and the Salton Sea. And he's written these just a great collection, and some of them, as I say, are interconnected, but they deal with that sort of interesting strata of society that sort of exists out at these reservation casinos and places like that. There's some mafia stuff, and also, as I mentioned, the Salton Sea. There are a couple of interrelated pieces about that. And they have clowns that appear in the novel, in the short stories too.
So glad
So
you
it's pretty-
gave that content warning, because
Pretty
we
terrifying.
need more content warnings for clowns. Because
I know.
I'm okay on the horror and everything else, but the clowns, you gotta
Clowns, I know, you gotta draw the line somewhere.
you gotta, it's a thing. It's a thing for people. Some people just can't do clowns.
Well, Todd is Lee Goldberg's brother. And we had a program with Todd, and these clowns, apparently in the area where he lives, just as I say, I think he lives in Indio or Palm Springs or one of those towns. But apparently there are these random clowns that will appear at like restaurants, and they'll come up and I don't know if they're just trying to take a picture with the clown, and so he somehow worked them into the.
Look, I've
Oh,
literally
man.
I've got like goosebump chills.
I know. And then another all-time favorite is Joe Landsdale. I think everybody needs some Joe Landsdale in their life. He writes the Hap and Leonard novels, which are groundbreaking, but he does all kinds of different stuff. And I think he's sort of a Mark Twain for our time. I can't recommend him highly enough.
This is actually a good point at which we should say, people watching this, because we know you do a lot of mail order outside. So people watching this and they're interested, say you've captured their interest and they want recommendations from you. What's the best way to approach the store to get at you?
You can just email me directly, Patrick@poisonedpen.com.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be happy to recommend stuff.
Now that they know your area of, well, expertise, but
Geez.
you're all over the store now, so.
Yeah, yeah. And I just like to expand, I like to, these days, it's like I've been so steeped in that particular genre for so long that I'm interested in exploring other things too, I mean, I read tons of history and biography and, whatever floats my boat, whatever's interesting.
We got to circle back to events.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Paco that you got to meet in person.
Yes.
Who are some of the other authors who are your heroes that you've gotten to meet?
Oh man, so many. As I
And
said,
you have to tell us who was the worst event ever.
The good one, the good stories,
oh man.
good stories. Who fell flat? Who totally,
I hate to say that.
who embarrassed the store?
I'll have to think of somebody who's passed away. We haven't really had any. I'll think of something, but this chunk of time that I've been involved in the store has been a pretty amazing period for the crime genre, coming from the mid 90s to today. I got a chance, I've had a chance to meet so many of the heavyweights, I mentioned Tony Hillerman early on, Robert B. Parker, several times, Ed McBain, Donald Westlake was one of the best thrilling ones for me. James Lee Burke, meeting him, I mean, he was always kind of a hero and he has such charisma, so that was it's always a thrill to talk to him. Walter Mosley, there've been so many. Those are just a few that come to mind.
And now the pen is doing more and more, or is it just that I'm noticing it more, kind of launching the books,
Yeah.
debuting the books. And that's something else I wanted to bring up too, because you pay a lot of attention to debut authors.
Yes.
Not everybody does. Most people want the big names because they know they're going to sell X number of books and everything. But I think you've always done a public service, and certainly an author service, by paying attention to debut authors and giving them a crack at your audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've watched them grow.
Right.
Markets
Right.
grow. Yeah.
That's been pretty cool. I mean, early on, watching, I'm just thinking of it. The perfect example of this is somebody like a Michael Connolly, right? I mean, he, and you both, I'm sure, know his stuff well. And watching like some of the early events, when I first started here, he was several books in already, but the crowds were still pretty small. And I think Barbara, from what she tells me, she had one of the first events that he did for Black Echo, which is a few years before I started, but there was just a few people. And so watching him build over the years, and in many ways have an old-fashioned model, he's been with the same publisher since the very beginning, and they've invested in him over the years, and he's just built slowly up, so that would be one. But there are so many that it's always exciting too when you see a debut author, they're excited, and yeah, we love that.
What's the favorite event you've ever done?
Oh man.
You can pick 3.
Oh gosh. Well, one of the more interesting ones that we did, and it wasn't something that necessarily I did personally, but we've had these conferences over the years, kind of irregularly. And early on, we had one that the theme was AZ Murder Goes ... And then one year it was classic, and then one year it was Western. And for the Western one, we had this group of writers who writes in both Western and crime genres. And that year, I don't even remember when it was. It was early 2000s maybe. But we had Elmore Leonard, we had Joe Landsdale. We had Lauren Estelman, and somebody else who's I'm forgetting. But that was really cool. I really liked that. I don't know. I mean, there have been so many good ones. Walter Mosley is always a highlight for me. You know, as I said, James Lee Burke, I always like talking to him. He's always inspiring. Specific ones. I'm trying to think of some good stories for you guys. There have been so many. You know, Sue Grafton, you know, people like that. Every once in a while, some of the British ones, you know, would come over that, you know, like P.D. James. Barbara had talked to P.D. James, and that was really, really pretty special. As far as we never had Ruth Rendell, and I wish we had, but there aren't that many that we haven't. You know, like Dick Francis never came here.
Oh, really?
No, and I know Barbara wanted him, but we never quite got him.
Interesting.
There have been just so many good ones. It's hard to pick them out.
Did you mention early on that when we talked before that you do some reviewing too?
Yeah. I do. I review for Publishers Weekly is the main one. I've done sporadically, you know, pieces for other venues as well. I've done a few things for Los Angeles Review of Books, and some other out of the way places, but I still review for PW, and I enjoy that. You know, it's not, you know, it doesn't pay much or anything like that, but it's the cool thing about reviewing is that, you know, have you guys ever, I'm sure you both have done some reviewing in your day. Yeah, lots. One of the
Barbara, Jayne, you're shaking your head. I did review like for 6 months, and I found that I could not be mean. And there were books that they just weren't great, and I didn't want to recommend them. And I found myself trying to find all the things about it that were okay. I just couldn't say, this doesn't work for me.
right.
And I realized, that's not going to work. I can't do that. So
Yeah,
I'm not a critical reader like you are. You know what I mean?
Well, it's
What's
tough
your-
because one of the good things about PW, at least for me, is that the reviews are anonymous. Otherwise, that would put me in a very awkward position, you know, because I come into contact with most of these writers at some point or another. And I have had, and I will, of course, I would never reveal which, but I have had the occasion when, you know, there's been a book that I just didn't work for me, and then we've had them at the store, and sometimes I've had to do the program. But
Karma. That's called karma.
it is karma. Yeah. But by the same token, you know, to JT's point, I do try to find the positive parts in a book. You know, I try to get my own ego out of the way as much as I can. And I can identify also when, okay, so this book might not be to my taste, you know, but it's a good example of X, you know, this kind of book. And usually I can recognize the strengths, even though it's not my kind of book, you know what I mean? But then there are some that are just, you know, it's like you have to have some sort of integrity. And so it is tough. It's like, all right, this is clunky as hell. And, you know, this doesn't really work that well, at least for me. And so, you know,
What's your philosophy of when you go into book reviewing in general? Do you have a methodology or philosophy of how you approach a book?
I think you know, there's just certain things that I read for, which is voice is probably the first one. And I read for voice. Plot is kind of secondary, but also extremely important, of course. You know, does the story work? Is it convincing? Is it something that hasn't been played out to death? You know, is the writing good? I mean, that's what I look for too. Is it well written? Just all those things come into play. You know, I'm always thinking about those. But mainly it's the voice. For me, it's like if it's a great voice, I can forgive the odd, you know, plots that don't really work or things like that. So I don't know if I don't know if I've articulated what my philosophy is. I just kind of,
Fairness.
yeah,
Sounds like to me. Fair,
yeah, I try to
very
be
fair.
fair, and I try to take it seriously. I try to think that, a lot of people that are purchasing books based on these recommendations, at least they used to at some point. I don't know if it's still as much of a deal today, but a lot of the trade, when I was first starting out, before I worked at the Poison Pen, these trade magazines were extremely important for book buyers. They would look at them and say, okay, well, all right, this is a starred review from PW, let's buy it, and so I'm aware of that, and I try to take it seriously, and I try not to just read the flap cover and review the book based on the flap, which some reviewers do, or read 10 pages and read the end. And I try to take it seriously, and respectfully.
It's an important job. I mean, because bookstores do still use those reviews to buy books, and what they
Yeah.
put in the store is what people are going to end up looking at and reading. Because one of the things the bookstores do is curate the reading for.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, I think one of the strengths that Poison Pen has is that we all like different stuff, and so somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm a fantasy and science fiction reader. I've read this, even though that might not be my area of interest or expertise. I can give them to PK, another staffer, Patrick King. There are two Patricks here. And, and he's encyclopedic on that subject. And he can say, okay, well, you like these guys, try this person. And so we can, and, Barbara, of course, knows everything, but, if someone says, I want a good historical, or I want a good medieval mystery, or whatever, I want a good romance. I want a good romantic suspense novel. I can, give them to John Charles, or I can give them to several other staffers that know that area much better than I do. And so it works well, us all liking different kinds of books.
Do you see anything trending right now in terms of what people are coming in asking for or getting excited about?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? You do wonder, and I'm sure you both as authors wonder about that. There's this strange vibe in the air, and it's hard to really grab it. It's like, what is it that people are responding to right now? I have noticed, and I think Jayne, you're on the cutting edge because there's been this real renewed interest in the golden age, the 20s and the 30s, that era. Yeah. So there's a new Amanda Quick novel coming very soon. When is that?
May 3rd. May 3rd.
May
Yeah.
3rd.
Yeah,
Next month.
yeah. And I think that, I don't know, there's been renewed interest in the traditional mystery, the British model, especially the golden age mysteries. I've seen that big time in the last few years. The Gothic, Barbara was way ahead of the curve on that. She was predicting that one. The Gothic, I don't know. What do you guys think? Have you seen those trends?
Well, the Gothic for sure. We've been talking about that for some time now, and JT has written some of the best, as far as I'm concerned. Like Her Dark Lies, I love that book, and The Good Girls Lie. Yeah, I'm a fan of that.
I didn't even pay her to say that. Oh my gosh.
I'm just a fan of that genre, and a lot of the books I've picked up have been from the pen, based on recommendations from you and the staff. I'm seeing a kind of an odd. To me, it's new. You're actually more able to speak to this than I am, Patrick. But it seems to me in a few of what I used to think of as mystery writers or mystery genre writers, I'm seeing a bit of what I would call the paranormal. I mean, maybe it's called magical realism or whatever, but for example, Robert Poby,
Mm,
with his character who's got a kind of a psychic vibe. I don't know how else you would describe it.
he's the City of Windows and
Mhm.
those books. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a hardcore procedural in many ways, but his particular talent is psychic in nature, really. Which I don't think of as something that shows up a lot in the modern mystery novel. Is it Scott Carson?
Yeah. Michael Carita's alter ego.
And he's using that basically for paranormal mysteries.
Right. That's true.
So I don't know.
That?
What's that?
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that that was
No,
Michael Carita?
no.
Yeah. That guy is
Out here in
disgustingly
Nashville
talented.
under a rock. Just ignore me. Oh my God.
I
He's
didn't know
amazing,
he
by
would.
the way.
But
Michael is amazing, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
What a
truly.
talent, you know?
Talent, genius, genuine, really, really
Super nice
amazing.
guy. Yeah. Yeah. Really.
Moan St. James. I'm thinking I've got her new book over here too. The book of cold cases. She has that little bit of supernatural edge in her mysteries as well.
Simone St.
Yeah, you're right. That is starting to be a little bit of a trend.
if I'm stumbling into it, that means it's a trend, because otherwise I wouldn't have stumbled into it. Somebody would have had to tell me about it. And I'm just sort of stumbling into it. So that's what makes me think there's something going on under the surface.
Do you think there's going to be realism? I mean, like, pandemic has really, given us a lot of awareness that probably people haven't had before. We had a huge political cycle that people who weren't political before got very political. Then we had a pandemic. Now we've got a war. It just seems to me, I mean, I've already got a story that is in those veins,
Really?
That's got to be coming. That's got to be the zeitgeist, it's pulling us to that right now.
I don't know about the pandemic so much. So in the apocalyptic novels, it's always been an element. I mean, that's always been what triggers whatever apocalypse that they're writing about is usually a pandemic. But when I look back after 1918, I don't see a lot of fiction that mentions
The Spanish flu.
the flu. Yeah. I mean, maybe it was there, but if it kind of sank, if it was there, it didn't.
Hemingway did a little bit, didn't he?
I don't recall. Yeah.
I feel like he's got a short story that was, gosh,
based on that.
I'll have to go look. Yeah. But no, you're right. It could boomerang the other direction too. And it'll be 10 years before anybody's ready.
That's it. Yeah. I think that we're also busy experiencing it.
And
That
you're right about it.
it's like, shit, what's going to happen now? And I think I can only speak for myself, but I think that we're also exhausted by it, that we maybe need a little bit of perspective. But you're starting to see it creep around because, writers can't avoid it any longer. Michael Connolly was the first one that I was aware of anyway, that used it in a crime novel. And he just did it in a very interesting way. It was starting to bubble up in the background. And so he didn't really analyze it too much. He just showed what was happening.
Lisa Unger's latest had a little bit of that in it. It was like, wow, we're in New York and they're saying there's going to be a problem. And that was it. And it just kind of, kept on going. It just mentioned that little, it had such an element of dread.
I don't know. It's hard. Yeah. I think publishers, I can imagine, are thinking like, God, do readers really want to read about it yet? I don't particularly, but
remember when the Mayan calendar said that the world was ending? There was a glut of Mayan world ending books, and if you notice, none of them got published. I don't think, but I do know. I mean, my agent was like, I've gotten 10 of these in the past week. No.
What's interesting though is that, and this has been going on for a while though, that the renewed interest in World War II fiction, the enduring interest in World War II fiction. And I think people enjoy reading about, you know, a generation going through a shared peril, a shared challenge, you know, and getting through it. I think part of that, you know, it explains that appeal. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. People seem
World
to.
War II novels almost, it's not a happily ever after, right? But you know what you're going to get from it because it's such a concrete situation. You know, in that book, you know that the good guys are eventually going to win, right? Is that one of the things about noir that attracts you, that there is that element of usually good triumphs over evil? Or is it still
I don't know if
sketchy?
it does in the noir novel.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. Is it still, is it part of that?
Well, with noir, yeah, it's funny. I don't know if I'd put it in those terms necessarily with good and evil. Noir seems to be, there seems to be like this element of, okay, you know, out of desperation or out of, you know, deals with things like failure and frustration. And a common riff is, you know, all right, I'm just going to make this one last score, you know, and then everything's going to be okay. And, you know, it's usually like a really bad decision. And you watch the kind of sucking down of the reaction. That's usually the noir kind of setup in some ways. So it's much more of a, you know, perhaps deals with other things. But the good, I don't know, and it deals with shades of gray rather than black, you know, black and white. And I think that appeals to me sometimes, you know, just the, but I think with the World War II era, there was that, and perhaps in hindsight, an illusion that we were all united against a common peril. I don't know if perhaps we were as united as we like to think that we were, but you know, and then you read crime fiction in the Vietnam era, and that whole notion explodes, and suddenly you get the protagonists aren't good guys. The protagonists are, you know, con men. You know, you get Richard Stark, you get all these other people who the cops are the bad guys. You know, and so it's interesting. You know,
I think of the noir as being more personal too, as opposed to say the big conspiracy novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
It's more of a one-on-one kind of, which is always, as JT and I've often discussed, the appeal of the Gothic.
The Gothic, it's the
Yeah.
internal. It's the internal instead of the external. Huh. That's fascinating. You do anthologies too, don't you?
Yeah. I've done 2 so far.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. The first one I did was called Phoenix Noir. And that was part of this long-running series that's done by Akashic Books. And they've done, I don't even know how many of them. But it was an honor to be able to do it, frankly. At that time, they'd done a number of them. They hadn't done that many, but, you know, LA Noir, DC Noir. And I just really admired what Johnny Temple, the guy at Akashic, was doing. His goal was to, you know, for major cities, was to have a collection of short stories that kind of took you into specific parts of the city. You know, each story was supposed to be in a different neighborhood, a different, you know, landmark, a different time. And the directive was to have not just a bunch of white male writers, to have it accurate, vaguely accurate ethnic and sexual representation of the city. So I thought, what a great challenge, you know, and to have a mixture of well-known people for the commercial hook. And so I just had a great time, you know, just putting that together and soliciting pieces, you know, like, hey, Stella Pope Duarte, you write so well about South Phoenix and these different neighborhoods. Can you give me a noir story set here? One of the best for that collection was one of my favorites. There's a really wonderful Navajo poet named Laura Tohe, and I was familiar with her stuff. I don't even know if she ever really published much in the way of fiction. She wrote lots of poetry, beautiful writer. And I said, hey, Laura, would you be interested in writing a real sleazy story with gratuitous sex, drugs, and violence? You know, and she rose to the occasion, you know, and I think it was she wrote this really great story about this kind of shape-shifting skinwalker femme fatale, you know, set in a particular part of Phoenix. And that was just a blast. I loved that. And then I had Diana Gabaldon. And so, yeah, I'm sure you guys have both had stories or edited anthologies before, but it's fun, you know. And the second one I did was about 5 years ago. There was a collection called The Highway Kind. And it was I had this concept where I wanted to put together, I noticed that there was a repeated riff in a lot of crime fiction, and especially in the noir stuff, about just not so much about cars, although cars figure into it, but it was more about the road and what the road symbolized in crime fiction, and all the different aspects of it. And originally I had tried to sell this collection as, all right, so each story will feature a different kind of car. And I thought, I don't want to limit that. And I put together this collection, and I'm extremely proud of it. I don't think it sold that well, but you know, it had a great collection of people, all different kinds of voices, and just talking about driving and the road and crime. And yeah, so that was the second one.
Is that a kind of an American theme?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and what cars symbolize to us, you know, individuality, freedom. You know, it's a very democratic thing as well. You know, we all share the roads together in some ways. You know, some people live out of their cars. Some people, you know, there's just a lot of fertile ground there for interesting stories.
Yeah.
You know, they take us different places, obviously. You know, they're a form of escape. We escape on the road. There's just lots of cool things. And I got just a remarkable batch of stories. I'm very proud of it. CJ Box, George Pelicanos, who's one of my big heroes. Kelly Braffett, Willie Vlotton, just James Salas, you know, who wrote the quintessential car noir Drive. He's another big hero of mine. So yeah, that was fun. And I've been thinking about trying to put together another anthology. I'm just trying to think of I like them to have a particular theme that would be interesting. So kind of brainstorming that. There's no money in them, as you guys know, you know, but they're fun. Yeah.
Well, the road idea was a great one. I love that concept.
Yeah, that is really cool.
It
That is really cool.
It was a blast.
Do you have any books just to kind of take us out of books that are coming out this year that you're looking forward to?
Yeah. Let's see here. One of the ones that I'm really keen on is this book by Gary Phillips. Sorry about the light, called One Shot Harry. And it's set in the early 1960s in Los Angeles. And the protagonist is a African-American photographer. And he sells photos to the Black-owned newspapers and magazines of the day, as well as, you know, some of the other papers around. And, you know, he's really a photojournalist at heart. You know, he does whatever pays the bills, but he gets involved in this crime, you know, series of crimes in Los Angeles in a very particular point in time. And it's a really interesting, Gary knows the social history of Los Angeles really well. And, you know, Martin Luther King is getting ready to come to town, and he just recreates a time and a place that at least to my knowledge of reading crime fiction, has kind of been neglected so far. And we've read all around it, but the early 60s in LA and what was going on, it's great. Terrific book. Really liked it. What else is coming out? Really excited. I'm a huge Don Winslow fan, and he has this new book out called City on Fire.
Great cover.
Yeah, he's a hero. There are some books that I've been hearing about that I really haven't read yet that I'm really excited to check out. There's one by a guy named Gabino Iglesias. And
Follow him on Twitter. He's cool. He's a cool guy.
Very, very nice guy. I met him last year on one of these virtual programs, and he has a first novel coming out from Mulholland. Oh man, the title of which escapes me. I'm sorry. But there have been so many great ones this past year, like Naomi Hirahara's book, Clark and Division, I thought was terrific. Boy, what else? Oh, one of my favorites. What I like to do as a bookseller, I like to point out people that may not be as well known, like in the public eye, and I like to point them out if I can. One of my favorites is this writer named Kathleen Kent, who's published 3 novels in this series set in Dallas, Texas, of all places. And she was nominated for the Edgar for this book, The Dime. But lesbian cop from England, or from Brooklyn rather, who's thrown into Dallas and has to survive in that very different environment and culture. And the writing's great, cartels. It's got a little something for everybody. Kathleen's a great writer, one of my favorites. But there are tons of new books coming out that I keep hearing about. Never ends.
No, it doesn't.
When you look back, because you do have a long history of the genre. Before we leave, it'd be interesting to me. I would like to know if you look back at the early influences like Dashiell Hammett and Chandler and stuff. What do you see in today's market, in today's writing, that still owes so much to the foundations of noir? Because they pretty much created it.
Yeah.
Is it still a strong element in the modern writing, or have other influences become stronger?
That's a good question.
I'm asking because when I did some research for one of my books, for the first time ever, I picked up Dashiell Hammett, which I hadn't actually read. I would just sort of saw the movie, saw the movies. And I was sort of shocked by the Maltese Falcon, because it just, everything is there. I mean, it's like the whole tough guy urban noir thing is just was right there on the page. I was sort of startled, to tell you the truth, when I realized that was written 100 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it is amazing to read them and just see how relevant many of them still are today. And you see the template, being created for the first time, that, and there are the two different, there's the Hammett, which is much more of the, I don't know, the tough guy, PI. What am I trying to say here? Raymond Chandler has much more of that kind of the code, the romanticism.
Romantic code, yeah.
The word, the world weary. And he wrote that, of course, down these mean streets, a man must go who's neither tarnished nor afraid. I mean, he wrote this manifesto about the simple art of murder. So yeah, you see their influences all over the place. I do still see them. I'm trying to think of, you do still see people writing historical kind of classic hard-boiled noir, with the fedora and cigarette smoke and all that kind of atmosphere. Those books are still being written. And I think Lauren Estelman does a great job of writing those still. The Amos Walker, long-running Amos Walker series would be an example of that. But yeah, sure, on subtler in subtler ways, you do see their influence. It's hard to, yeah.
It feels
John
like
Connolly.
they created a kind of an archetype is what it feels
Yeah.
like. That
Absolutely.
Yeah.
keeps getting reinvented.
Right. Right.
That's how you pull in the new generations. You reinvent the archetypes.
That's
Exactly
right.
what you do. That's how you pull in new readers, right? I mean, that's what we've been doing for years and years and years. That's how we do it.
Right.
That's how you start a new trend, kids. Don't reinvent an archetype. Easy peasy, right?
Have you ever, has either of you thought about just as sort of a personal challenge, writing completely against your normal type, the normal type of read? Like, but then again, it's like, you got to make a living too, right? I mean,
I think I think people do it if they're drawn to it. I think JT has done more experimenting than I have. I've always.
Except for you're
Yeah.
writing in 3 different areas. So you experiment quite a bit as well.
No, for me, that's all window dressing. You know, for me, the story is the story and it's always in the same lane. It's my core story. And I just move it into, I mean, it works to fool people, I guess. But the bottom line is, like, I know I just love my own, at this point, I have no reason to go away from my core story because it still calls to me. But what I do like to do is put it into new environments. I think you do. You've actually, because you've gone into the straight Gothic, but with Tomb of the Queen, you're doing straight up paranormal, magical stuff. You've got your hardcore detective stories.
Yeah, Taylor Jackson. I mean, and yeah, I was sitting here, I was about to say, I don't have a core story, but literally in just the past few weeks, I have realized I do have a core story. And that is the woman being put into a situation where she has to become a leader. And those books are my jam anyway. And apparently that is my core story. And it crosses all of the books that I've done in one way or another. So I was like, oh, I do have one. Because I feel like I'm kind of all over the place. You know, it's like, whatever. I want to write a romance. I want to write a romance so bad. Oh my gosh. I mean, and I know what the story, you know, it's one of those things. And I know my publishers will be just like, are you kidding me? Who dies? Come on. You know, it's interesting. Writers get, Patrick, I'm sure you've seen this, the writers get encouraged to do what they do well and not step into other realms.
right.
Can you think of some authors that have stepped out of their comfort zone off the top of your head? I mean, that have just gone in a different direction?
I think a great example of that, and I'm sure it just bugs the hell out of his publishers, is Walter Mosley. You know, I mean, he does have a couple of these long running series like the Easy Rollins series, but then he'll do, like, you know, just these wildly inventive one-offs, you know, like he had one called John Woman a couple of years ago. He'll do speculative fiction. He'll do, you know, these erotic thrillers. I mean, he's tried all kinds of different things. And that's got to be, you know, as I say, he has all these different publishers, but I admire that. But he also continues, I think he goes back to what he normally does, you know, the long running series, perhaps refreshed and rejuvenated. And Jayne, you write under 3 different, at least 3 that I know of, different pen names. Do you find it refreshing to kind of, you know, sort of alternate and mix it up a little bit?
Yeah, it's amazing for me what just moving between the eras, because I'm doing the 1930s and I'm doing the futuristic and the contemporary. Just that kind of change is more than enough to get me excited about the next, going back into another world. If I'd stayed in one era, because I've been at this a while now, if I'd stayed in one era all these years, I think I would have been run out of stories for it. But the cross fertilization does work for me. So
What is your core story?
mine,
Uh-huh.
it's always the core conflict is always trust. And the core conflict requires the protagonist to have to trust each other in order to survive. And so it always starts out as the two people in a foxhole kind of scenario. And in a way, it's kind of a buddy story, I guess, except that it's a romance instead. But the trust and the risk factors are, and I'm always doing characters who are in a position of reinventing them, having to reinvent themselves. And I see that in your books too, the reinventing thing.
Oh my gosh, we're going to have a whole conversation about this because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I am just, I mean, that I do it is a joy, and words come out and people publish them is great. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I would love to hear somebody else tell me what it is that I'm doing that I can then go, this is what I'm doing. That'd be great.
Well, whatever you're doing, it's working.
Just don't think too much about it, right? Just don't think too much about it.
Now, have you written under various pseudonyms as well?
Me?
Yeah.
Just JT Ellison and Joss Walker. So the fantasy series, the Joss Walker is the only one. Yeah.
No, Joss Walker. Is that YA or is it?
No, it's adult.
Adult.
It's
fantasy.
adult, but it's not. There's this really, I don't want to say they're smutty, but they're pretty sexy, and I wanted to do something that was lighter and more PG. And so these are PG, mild language, very funny, closed door. Anything sexy that happens, it's closed door. I just wanted something that appealed, that moms could read with their daughters, that was still an adult story. I mean, she's young, she's 23, but it's still an adult story with adult themes, and it gets more adult as the story is progressing. But it's fun. I mean, switching from thriller, they are thrillers. They're just urban fantasy thrillers, so there's magic, and it is so refreshing to be able to, okay, I'm in a difficult situation. How am I going to get out of? How am I going to get her out of here? The world is crumbling under her feet. Oh, that's right. It's magic. She can create a portal and she can leave. Oh, it's really, it's kind of cheating. Magic lets you cheat a little bit. Do you feel like the psychic lets you cheat a little bit on the story? You put constraints in though.
Yeah, I do have constraints on the psychic, but I like the psychic because it takes it out of having to worry about police procedural stuff. Mm-hmm. Crimes are not the kind of crimes we expect law enforcement to solve. So the onus is on the characters to solve the crime. So it's more a way of making the characters have no excuse. They can't just use forensics or something. So it's more of a plot device, but I also like the intimacy. The psychic thing adds a layer of intimacy and bonding to the relationship. So, yeah.
Are you both hard at work on manuscript right now? Or should you be? Not talking to me.
Oh, but this has been great. Any questions we should ask you that we haven't asked you that you want to get out there?
Oh boy. No, I'm much more comfortable asking you guys questions.
Yeah, you turned this around on us.
I tried to. Yeah, it's funny. My wife and actually other people have told me that, you're very good at interrogating, drawing other people out without revealing much about yourself, and I didn't realize that was a skill that I'd cultivated. But
ninja talent bookseller.
Yes. Well, the one thing, we were talking a little bit about, just as a bookseller, how you learn an awful lot about your customers. You become like a part-time psychologist. Sometimes you learn a lot about your, but
more than you ever wanted to know. Yeah,
it's interesting. It is a very personal connection in many ways over time. And I've gotten to know the customers over decades now. And some of them, since Scottsdale has a big snowbird population, sometimes it's like, all right, well, they made it back for another year, and hey, we both still alive. It's good to see you. And so, Yeah, just a
Getting the
lot.
holiday card. If you don't get the holiday card, it's like,
Right,
oh,
I guess
what
you-
happens?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So no, just long-term friendships, and that's one of the neat things about just being involved for so long.
I think I know customers do develop relationships with bookstores.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting process, but it's very, very real.
Yeah. And especially these last few years, our customers have really, they're so loyal, and they've really kept us going. I mean, we've had an incredible, the pandemic strangely has been like, it's been our biggest couple of years, so.
That's amazing.
May you live in interesting times, right?
I want to live in boring times. Boring.
That's what we want. Yeah.
B-O-R-I-N-G. Boring.
Yeah.
No.
As we get back to some semblance of our, normal, we're doing more in-person events, which is great. I think we've really missed that. And yeah, I think we could use a period of just calm. I don't think that's in the cards for us, but it's nice to have a period of relative, a nice boring period.
Yeah.
We'll take
lots of time to read.
That's right.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And
thank you very much. It's been great.
And we've been talking to Patrick Millikin, bookseller at the Poison Pen in Scottsdale, available online. You can find him online at poisonpen.com.
Yeah.
And thank you, JT, for helping.
Thank you, Jayne.
Yes.
Thank you for running this as always. You're just so much smoother at it than I am. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to do this. It's great.
Oh, it's fun. And we enjoy it.
We do very much. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks.
Cheers.
See you, JT.
Bye.
Here. Bye-bye.